Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel for the next installment in our new figure showcase series. And for today's episode, we'll be looking at my latest acquisition from EXO-6, and it is their 6-scale version of 7 of 9 from Star Trek Voyager. I did have to wait a little bit longer for this one since I ended up ordering from Sideshow as opposed to ordering from EXO-6 directly, which is why the review is coming your way a little later than it normally would have. Now, as far as character, I think 7 of 9 is a pretty iconic one in the Star Trek universe. I remember when she came on board Voyager, I think in season 3, and all the promotions surrounding her arrival. And obviously story-wise, it opened up the Delta Quadrant Borg storyline a little bit more. And obviously we ended up losing Kes during this time, who frankly I never really connected to, and that also does hold true for Neelix, which who I oftentimes found a bit annoying. But 7 getting introduced definitely changed Voyager as a whole, I felt like. And she did become a much more pivotal character than Kes ever was. So when she went up for pre-order, there was no question I was going to pick her up, as she was such an important character. And we'll touch on that later, but if you've watched Picard, and in particular Picard Season 3, 7 really has a great story arc that culminates in that series. But again, we'll discuss that a little later. But as we normally do, let's start by looking at the overall set we're getting here. And she feels like one of the more loaded releases. Nowhere near Cisco, of course, who just came as a beautiful set with all the accessories, but definitely not bare bones. So we are getting an array of hands, a phaser rifle, which unfortunately is a configuration I'm not crazy about, a belt, your array of typical accessories like the tricorder, and of course she comes with that standard EXO-6 display stand, although as opposed to a crotch grabber, it's a waist clamp. And I'll say I think the stand might be needed here, but again, more on that as I post 7 up a little bit to get a feel if it's actually a piece that's going to become pivotal for or essential for the character or for the figure. So as we normally do, let's start with an in-depth look at the accessories. And first off, the hands. And the nice thing here is that you're getting her 2 distinctive looks, with the hand on the left having the Borg implants. The highlight here for all of these, to me, is definitely the hand with the Borg nanoprobe injectors, since I think by itself it creates some unique posing opportunities. But I do think all the hands are nicely detailed, and you're getting a decent variety of gripping and posing hands suitable for all the accessories. Bare hands look great, while the ones with the Borg implants look okay, although there is a little paint rub. Nothing too distracting here, so pretty happy. Next, we'll group most of the accessories, which include your standard hand phaser, the tricorder, which if you're not familiar with EXO-6's previous releases, is a nice accessory that opens and closes with magnets, so avoids hinges and potential breaks. And finally, you do get the pad, which is 100% the same as the other figures in the line, with the same sticker showing the Borg cube. Not a deal breaker at all, but just something to note. Now, our next accessories are interesting because unlike the other bridge officers from the Voyager crew that had magnets on the jumpsuit, 7 actually doesn't include magnets on her suit itself. So to remedy that, you have a rubber belt that wraps tightly around the figure and holds the holsters for the phaser and the tricorder. And they all match 7's suit color, and I will say that while a simple accessory, it works really well with the figure, and I do have to note that it's very fashion forward of the Voyager crew to get 7 matching holsters. And the last piece, of course, is the phaser rifle, which is the compression type. Detail work is really nicely done on this one, and it's not the first time we've gotten this rifle. Again, frankly, not my favorite at all, but it does serve its purpose and is a nice accessory, although not one that 7 used too frequently on the show. Now, let's move on to the sculpt, and I will say that I've noticed with EXO-6, with the exception of that Janeway sculpt, that they're getting much better in hand. And also, I do have a harsher light on the portrait, so it may be washing out some of the detail. But I think it's a really solid sculpt overall. Is it perfect? No, but it's solid. The eyes continue to improve, and I think that's a pivotal thing for any of these 6-scale figures. Unlike some of the previous releases, this one doesn't have that dreaded misaligned eye thing. But there is some great detail on the eyes, and the highlight here has to be the Borg implant over her left eye. Paintwork here was done amazingly well, and there is some great detail too, with some inlaid gold accents, and definitely no paint bleed. Only questionable thing here that I'm not crazy about is her hair. It's not terrible, but you can see some paint issues along her hairline. But again, under the light, it looks much more plasticky than in hand. But overall, I think it's a good effort from EXO-6. Now, the figure itself. I have to be honest, at first I didn't know what to expect. EXO-6 made a huge point about this being a fully customized body, and I will say it does look great, and I think the proportions are very realistic, meaning it looks like a real person, so I give EXO-6 a lot of credit there. And the way the figure poses, with some patience, which sometimes I lack, but with patience you can really make the figure look natural and real. And there is actually a weight and heft to her when you pull her out of the box. The other thing to give EXO-6 credit for is the bodysuit. They picked a really nice fabric that I think replicates the one from the show remarkably well. Stitch work on mine is just top notch and does help to elevate what could otherwise be looked at as a very simple clothing set. And of course the comm badge looks great. Now she is wearing heels, again, very fashionable of Starfleet, but all jokes aside, at first I was concerned about the figure's stability since the body does feel heavy. The ankle joints do feel a tad loose, so I was concerned that the figure would 100% need that stand in order to be able to hold poses or feel secure. As I pose the figure, I'm happy to say she can actually hold a lot of poses without needing that stand. And the body does let you, again, replicate those natural poses she had in the show. As opposed to 7 we're seeing in Picard, who is much more action-oriented, the 7 on Voyager was much more of a scientist, and some of the better poses I'm getting out of the figure are just more natural standing poses with like the pad. Now, as far as articulation goes, she has a pretty nice range, and her shoulders do pivot up nicely to allow her to attain that straight arm pose. Now, normally the EXO-6 figures have all had double jointed elbows. For 7, I don't know if that's the case. I don't think it is, to be honest. First of all, be careful with the elbows. They're one of the stiffest joints I've felt in a figure in a long time. So out of an abundance of caution, I positioned the elbows very slowly. And once you hit that 90-degree bend, you start to feel a lot of resistance, so I stopped there. And even looking at EXO-6's video for this figure, I didn't really get the sense that she's double jointed. If she is, then it might just be the stiffness of the joint that's at issue here. I also want to talk wrist peg design. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I had a string of bad luck with wrist pegs and had a number of breaks in a row, and those included Lucas Sinclair from 3-0 and also Michael Burnham from EXO-6. And one thing I noticed for those figures, the peg was held to the ball joint with a small tab. For 7, it's almost like a fully redesigned element that seems much more robust. So huge plus, and I had no issues at all swapping out the hands and positioning the accessories in them. So while a little stiff, I didn't really run into any major issues with her. So overall, I think she turned out great. I think EXO-6 continues to improve on the sculpts and more importantly on the paint app for these figures. And I will note that directly under bright light you do lose a lot of the detail work, and at least for me, I think the figure looks much better in hand, and I'm happy to have her and by extension be close to completing that Voyager command crew. And maybe my review and my views of EXO-6 and this figure in particular are a little biased due to the nostalgic effect coming off seeing Picard season 3. That final season of the show actually really stayed with me, and I don't think it's just great Star Trek. I think it's actually just really good TV overall. And while there was a lot of focus on Picard and that Next Generation crew, 7 of 9 was a pivotal character in more ways than the earlier seasons. And just an FYI, I am going into some spoiler territory here, so if you haven't watched season 3, please feel free to pause and come back later or just jump over this. But seeing 7 progress from that character that was rescued by Janeway to seeing her Borg child killed in season 1 of Picard, to now being a full-fledged member of Starfleet and responsible for putting up one of the last bastions of defense protecting Earth against the Borg, it just felt like a great story arc for her. And her final conversation with Captain Tuvok as she gets her promotion to captain herself, it was such a great moment for Voyager fans. Season 3 of Picard definitely also felt like a nice callback to Voyager as well, and ending, at least for now, it's a good ending at least for now for 7's story, with her becoming the captain of the Enterprise G. It's just such an amazing development for the character. So I think that makes me look at this figure in a different way, because this is early 7 with her social awkwardness, learning to be a human again, dealing with the loss of separation from the collective. And knowing EXO-6 and their announcement of upcoming Picard figures, I'm really excited at the thought of having a Starfleet version of 7 to show that evolution of her as a character. So again, super happy with how this turned out, and Ensign Kim should be dropping shortly, and Tom Paris should be going up for pre-order. So that would just leave B'Elanna and Neelix for Voyager. And the CEO of EXO-6 already teased Species 8472, which I can't wait for. I love that storyline in Voyager, and I love the design of the species. So I'm glad Voyager isn't quite done yet. But 7 really does feel like a really amazing, unique figure in hand, and I think she's going to stand out in a Star Trek display or any display right now. So I'm really happy, and I think she's a great figure. So that was a quick look at 7 of 9 and 6 scale figure form. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, thanks for watching. And if you are enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.